I'm going to give you a little bit more help in preparing for the test. I'm going to use this little study PowerPoint as a way of doing that. So these cycles, as I mentioned before, just indicate different areas that you want to focus on and be mindful about and prepare for. So I had to update the lecture, so I've done that. That's in a separate spot, so you want to make sure and watch that. Okay, so then it takes you through these forms of argument. You really need to know what induction is and you know how it's used on a daily basis. We use this so frequently. I mean, you go to buy something and you sample whatever it is. I mean, you try on the dress or you try on the Levi's and you go through this whole process. You know, you go to decide. I mean, here's one that I probably mentioned in the lecture. You go to decide on who's going to be your mate. You know, what do? That's trial and error. It's induction, right? So that is general examples to a tentative, not absolute conclusion, because that may be revised later as you have more experience. This is experiential. Polls, surveys, all those kinds of things, right? So you can study up further online. Maybe I'll give you a couple of links on that. Not that complicated. It's just a matter of evaluating the argument. What is deduction? It goes from absolute premises, right? Major premise, minor premise, to a conclusion in the form of a syllogism. So how does deduction work? It's closed-ended. If you accept the premises, and many times you should not, you have to take a very close look at the premises. That's why people say, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to question your premise, right? So there's so much abuse of logic going on now that I wouldn't begin to know where to start. It comes at us on a daily basis, and I don't know, personally, it's offensive to me that so many college age and beyond people will accept the kind of idiotic reasoning that we're being asked to accept by the current administration. It is absolutely an abomination to reasoning to make wild claims and have no evidence for them, whether it's to be wiretapped, whether it's the number of electoral votes, and then simply make these claims and have no basis, no reasonable premise, no reliable evidence for them. It's appalling, really. To me, it's appalling. I don't know about you. So, anyway, what is deduction? Here's a deductive argument. It's closed-ended, right? All students who expect to pass English P 101B must submit their essays and final exams. Okay, now that's a major premise. You get. I mean, if that's airtight, then it's airtight, right? So that's a major premise. All right, minor premise. Let's just pull this out of the hat. Joe, I don't have a Joe in there. Joe did not complete his essays or his final exam. All right, that's the minor premise. Therefore, what's the conclusion? It is bound. It has hemmed you in. Joe will not pass English B 101B. Oh, that's sad for Joe. Okay, so you need to know these. How do logical fallacies relate to critical thinking? First of all, you need to explore what you think critical thinking is. In my book, it's not negative thinking. Far from it. It is, again, to quote Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living, right? So the most telling form of critical thinking is questioning myself, questioning my own premises, questioning my own arguments. I saw very little of this, frankly, in the Rose for Emily essays, at least most of them. So that's going back to looking very carefully at how we've arrived at conclusions. What kind of arguments are being waged? What kind of argument is being used to convince us to buy something, to vote for someone, whatever it happens to be? What is the basis of the argument? Does it hold up, right? And if it doesn't, then we break it apart, and you can easily do that if it's a deductive argument into the premises, and do they, in fact, lead to the conclusion, right? So critical thinking is a form of thinking which is really, I think, and I mentioned this in the lecture, this creative thinking. It is a form of imagination for many people. In other words, can you imagine the arguments that are going to be offered to refute your own argument? Then can you fend them off? Uh, can you refute those arguments? And how would you do that? Would you do so that with tolerance and respect for the opposition, if the opposition indeed deserves respect, based on the points that the opposition has made? Excuse me. So there you go. That's a little bit about critical thinking, not negative thinking, but it is using a very sharp kind of precision in dissecting arguments and sensing when arguments are being made. Some folks don't even sense that arguments are being used, right? So that's a little bit about that. The lecture goes into more of that. Obviously, logical fallacies, you need to call them out. This is an ethical obligation to point out when a logical fallacy has been committed. Like after this, therefore, because of this. And, there was a classic one. I'm sorry, I have to use some of these. Well, not really sorry. When Trump did launch the short little military action, several people were killed in that action against, quote, terrorists. And when that was launched and the action was criticized, then the comment was made and the argument was made, well, that was started under the Obama administration. Well, first of all, something that had begun in the Obama administration is not necessarily something that has to be done in the administration that follows. The reasoning is so threadbare. Anyway, it goes into more and more of that, and I don't want to go into all of that, but so logical fallacies, pointing them out. That's post hoc. After this, therefore, because of this, after there was a meeting held, a strategic meeting, by the way, in which the Yemen operation was considered, and it was not mandated and couldn't be mandated by a previous administration. I don't know. It gets pathetic after that. So logical fallacies, obviously, we need to point them out. Okay, so you had the guest lecture. These are all study questions, and then and there's that little guy on the next slide. That didn't come in, but you do have the lecture. It's been given to you. Okay, and then you had a little slide there that I won't go into. These are the logical fallacies that I would hold you accountable for, and you need to study those. You can even use cards on which you write the definitions of those, and you can find those in any reliable website. And I've given you a couple that you can use if you want to do that, and be able to provide examples of your own. So what would I put on the test? I mean, here's a typical question. Discuss the difference between induction and deduction, and strengths and weaknesses of each. Well, obviously the strength of deduction is that if we accept the premises, it leads to a definite conclusion. Actually, deduction can help in our own educational growth process, because if we find a generalization that holds, then we apply it in our situation. It can make our lives easier. We don't have to relearn whatever it is over and over again, which is really sort of a sentence. We don't want that to happen. All right, so providing examples of your own really does help here. Okay, and being confident in using critical thinking, I think, is very, very important. There is no time in my lifetime when critical thinking has been more important. Not to accept what someone says they're going to do. Instead, look at what they're actually doing. And there is a big, big difference in that. And to question the premises, oh my heavens, do we ever need to do that? All right. So then we walk through all these things. But what do you need to know? Have to identify logical fallacies if I give them to you, and you would then apply the correct one. If I give you a hasty generalization, right? All Muslims are terrorists, then you would have to identify that as a hasty generalization. Well, and of course there are numerous exceptions to that, and you can question the premise of that. And in fact, there are Christian terrorists as well. We don't talk a lot about that. Okay, So you have to be able to identify basic logical fallacies, define critical thinking, provide examples of critical thinking, know the difference between deduction and induction, use the study questions, and ye shall be fine. At least you should be, right? Okay, I'm going to let it go at that, and I'm just going to hope that that helps you quite a bit.